Do you dare follow Jonah Crow into the frozen heart of Colorado's Rocky Mountains, where $1 buys a cabin, but may cost your life? Step into the Wild West, where every snowdrift hides danger, every shadow hides betrayal, and love can bloom in the coldest, cruelest winters. The bitter winter wind sliced down Black Pine Ridge with a cruelty that few men dared to endure. Snowflakes swirled in thick, ghostly clouds, sticking to Jonah Crow's worn coat and rimmed hat as he guided his horse up the narrow, treacherous path. The year was 1886, and the Colorado Rockies were a land of silence, danger, and relentless cold. Jonah was a man who had spent his life moving through shadows, hunting, trapping, and surviving alone. He had no friends, no family, and no intention of letting anyone close enough to know his story. But today, he carried with him a deed to a cabin, a piece of land no one else wanted, purchased for the astonishing price of $1. Lead Creek, the nearest town, had warned him in hushed tones about Black Pine Ridge. Cursed, they said. The last trapper went mad up there. Died howling at the snow. Jonah ignored the warnings. Curses had never troubled him, only hunger, cold, and gunpowder mattered. $1 was all he needed for a chance at solitude, a place to call his own in a world that had never offered him kindness. As the ridge flattened, the outline of the cabin appeared through the swirling snow. It was a small, haphazard structure, the kind built from weathered logs and patched boards, roof sagging in places, the chimney crooked and cracked. But Jonah noticed something immediately. Smoke spiraled upward from the chimney in lazy curls. Someone had already claimed this place, someone living in the so-called cursed cabin. Jonah dismounted, letting the reins slip through his fingers. The snow crunched under his boots as he approached, rifle slung across his back. He paused at the edge of the clearing, noting the footprints leading to the door. There was no mistaking them. Someone had been moving through the snow recently, and their tracks were fresh. The door creaked open before he could knock. Inside, firelight danced across the walls, illuminating a woman with sharp eyes and a rifle aimed directly at him. Her hair was tangled and wild, her cheeks streaked with dirt and ash, and her stance was one of lethal readiness. Jonah could see she was no ordinary trapper or homesteader. She carried the weight of danger, of someone who had survived more than her share of violence. I bought this place, Jonah said slowly, his hands raised, not out of fear but out of respect for the weapon pointed at his chest. The woman's gaze measured him like a hawk circling prey. I don't care who bought it. You're not staying. Her voice was firm, laced with the cold edge of survival. Jonah's eyes scanned the cabin. It was small, sparsely furnished, but clearly defended. Crates of food lined one wall, supplies stacked neatly near the stove. There was a subtle order in the chaos, a sign of someone who had been living on the edge and knew the value of preparation. I reckon we're already here, both of us. Might as well talk, he said. For a long moment, she studied him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Finally, she lowered the rifle just slightly, though her grip remained tight. Jonah could see the tension in her arms, the coiled readiness that spoke of past fights, of fleeing, of hiding. The wind outside rattled the cabin, and the snow drifts pressed against the logs like hungry hands. Jonah set down his pack, pulling out a blanket and tossing it near the fire. Cold night for strangers, he said. The words were simple, but in the mountains, simplicity often carried meaning. Survival often depended on alliances formed between the least likely people. Over the next days, Jonah observed her. She moved with precision, checking the perimeter, arranging supplies, keeping watch through the small windows even when the sun tried to shine through the storm clouds. Jonah kept to himself mostly, cutting firewood, hunting game, and slowly learning the rhythms of the cabin. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. Trust could be built in the Wild West, but only in increments, and both of them knew better than to offer it freely. Jonah learned her name was Millie Laroo, though she gave little else. Her story came in fragments, glimpses between tense moments and quiet chores, a corrupt sheriff in Lead Creek, a silver claim hidden in the mountains, a brother gone missing. She had been running for weeks, hiding from men who would see her dead to claim what her family had discovered. Jonah didn't ask questions he didn't need to, but he understood danger when he saw it, and Millie carried it in every movement. The cabin became a world unto itself, a fortress against the winter, against the greed outside, against the cruelty of a town that had long forgotten the meaning of justice. Fires burned continuously in the stove, the walls echoing the crackle of logs as Jonah worked and Millie kept watch. The storm outside grew worse, snow piling against the roof, wind whistling through the cracks. The mountains were unforgiving, and anyone caught unprepared would freeze before the sun rose. Despite the tension, a subtle bond began to form. Jonah noticed the way Millie's eyes softened when she thought no one was watching, how she moved with careful confidence that came from knowing the wilderness better than any town sheriff. She saw him as a stubborn man, unafraid of isolation, willing to stand his ground even when every warning told him to run. He saw in her strength a reflection of his own, someone forged in hardship, someone unwilling to yield to fear. The ridge outside was quiet now, snow blanketing everything, muffling sounds and hiding dangers. But both of them knew it was only a matter of time before the outside world intruded. The sheriff would not forget the silver claim, the cabin, or the woman who refused to give up what was rightfully hers. And Jonah, for the first time in years, realized he was not alone in facing the cold, the danger, or the unknown. The snow had stopped falling, but the cold remained, sharp enough to bite through even the thickest coat. Jonah Crow sat on a rough-hewn log outside the cabin, carving notches into a piece of pine. Each notch counted the days since he'd arrived, though the days felt longer in the unbroken silence of Black Pine Ridge. Inside, the stove crackled, and Millie Laroo moved like a shadow, checking the windows, peering into the whiteness beyond. Her rifle leaned against the wall, ready at a moment's notice. Jonah had never shared a space with anyone who carried such an aura of danger, someone whose every movement seemed calculated for survival. Yet, he couldn't deny a certain rhythm had begun to form between them. She didn't speak unless necessary, but her presence alone was a reminder that the mountains were alive, watching, judging. One morning, a distant sound tore through the ridge. A low, ragged whistle, almost human, almost animal. Jonah froze, listening. Millie had already disappeared toward the window, her rifle in hand. "Tracks," she said softly, pointing toward a slight break in the snow. "Men came through here last night. Didn't see us, or they'd have shot." Jonah squinted at the fresh marks. They were heavy, made by boots that carried more weight than a lone traveler would bear. His hand went to the rifle slung across his back. "Sheriff's boys," he muttered. "Come to see if the cabin's worth what you paid." Millie didn't answer. She simply loaded her rifle with quiet precision, her eyes scanning the ridge as if she could see through the drifting snow. Jonah understood immediately, this was a test of patience, of endurance. The mountains were both a shield and a trap. They would be forced to fight if the men came closer. Days passed with a tense, almost unbearable quiet. They rationed food carefully, dried meat over the fire, and melted snow for water. Jonah chopped wood in shifts, Millie patrolled the perimeter, and together they reinforced the cabin with makeshift barriers. Every sound outside made them pause, the snap of a branch, the howl of wind through the pines, the distant echo of a horse's hoof striking the frozen earth. One night, Jonah awoke to the cabin shaking with sudden force. He grabbed his rifle and flung the door open. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls, piled high enough to block the front completely. Millie's silhouette appeared behind him, rifle in hand, eyes sharp and glowing in the firelight. "They're close," she whispered. "I can smell their horses. They're surrounding the ridge." Jonah's jaw tightened. The sheriff had grown impatient, and the stories of Black Pine Ridge being cursed didn't matter anymore. It was a battleground now, and every step outside would be a risk. "We hold this place," Jonah said, voice low but firm. "No one takes it. Not them." Not anyone. Millie's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something more than suspicion there. Trust, small but real, flickered in the shadows of the fire. Together, they mapped escape routes through the snow, dug trenches near the cabin to funnel any attackers, and set traps with whatever materials they had. Every plank of wood, every nail, every inch of snow became part of their defense. The next morning, they saw them, dozens of mounted men at the edge of the ridge, riding cautiously through the snow. Sheriff Langley led them, his eyes cold, his hat pulled low over his face. His posse shouted, demanding the cabin, laughing at the idea that $1 could claim more than a heap of cold, empty logs. Jonah stepped outside, rifle in hand. Millie emerged beside him, rifle raised. The wind carried their words. "This land isn't yours," Jonah called. "Back down or pay the price." The sheriff laughed, a hollow sound that carried over the mountains. "Price? You'll pay with blood, old man. That cabin, and what's beneath it, belongs to me." Bullets tore through the air, shattering snow, splintering logs, and sending the wind carrying a storm of ice and violence. Jonah and Millie moved as one, a seamless unit trained by necessity. They ducked, fired, and countered every advance, using the terrain to their advantage. Snowdrifts became barricades, pine trees shields, and the ridge itself a natural fortress. Hours passed. The attackers had strength in numbers, but they lacked knowledge of the land. Jonah and Millie had something stronger than sheer force, the instinct to survive and a deep understanding of every hollow, ledge, and drift on Black Pine Ridge. They fought with silent coordination, each move saving the other from a stray bullet or hidden trap. When the last of the posse had retreated, Jonah slumped against a wall, breath fogging in the cold air. Millie stood across from him, rifle lowered but eyes still scanning the ridge. "You fight like you've lived alone too long," she said, voice rough but not unkind. "And you survive like the mountains raised you," Jonah replied. They both laughed softly, the sound mingling with the groan of wind through the cabin. For a moment, the weight of violence lifted, replaced by the strange comfort of shared danger and mutual respect. Over the following days, the snowstorms continued, and the mountains held their secrets close. They hunted together, shared meals over the fire, and began to learn the rhythm of living in the wilderness with someone else. Words were still few, but actions spoke louder. Jonah noticing the way Millie silently tended to the cabin, Millie watching how he anticipated threats before they arrived. And somewhere between the silence, the tension, and the harshness of life on Black Pine Ridge, a subtle bond formed. They began to rely on each other not only for survival but for the reassurance that someone would stand with them when the world outside was ruthless and unyielding. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and horseflesh down the slopes of Black Pine Ridge. Jonah Crow crouched low behind a drifted wall of snow, rifle steady in his hands. Millie Laroo was beside him, her breath visible in the frigid morning air, fingers tightening around her Winchester as she scanned the ridge for movement. The snowstorm had passed, but it had left the world blanketed in white, a silent stage for the battle they knew would come. The sheriff was relentless. Sheriff Langley and his men had returned with a vengeance, their anger fueled by greed and bruised pride. They thought that two isolated souls, a man and a woman, could not hold a cabin against a posse of armed men. But Jonah and Millie had learned the land, and the land had begun to teach them its secrets. Every hollow, every ridge, every drift of snow became part of their defense, a weapon as sharp as any bullet. From the cabin's upper window, Millie spotted movement near the tree line. "They're splitting up," she whispered. "Trying to flank us. We need to move." Jonah nodded. He had been expecting it. He had grown familiar with the patterns of those who sought to take what wasn't theirs, men who trusted only numbers and force. "We'll lead them into the trap," he said. "Follow my lead, and watch each other's back." The first men emerged from the pine, boots crunching in the snow, rifles raised, faces pale from cold and anticipation. Jonah's finger rested lightly on the trigger. Millie's eyes never left the approaching threat. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, and then the first shots rang out. Snow exploded into the air as bullets struck drift and timber alike. The ridge echoed with the roar of gunfire, mingled with the wind, a chaotic symphony of survival. Jonah fired, taking careful aim, and saw one of the sheriff's men fall back into the snow. Millie's shots were precise, deadly, and deliberate. Every movement between them was unspoken communication, a rhythm honed through days of trust, observation, and necessity. They weren't just defending a cabin, they were defending the life they were slowly building together, a fragile trust hardened by hardship. Hours passed, though the sky barely changed, trapped behind thick clouds and swirling snow. The sheriff's men regrouped, trying to break through, but Jonah and Millie held their ground. Every failed advance left the attackers more desperate, more reckless, and more vulnerable to the traps Jonah had set, hollows under snow, hidden pits, and clever snares that turned the ridge into a maze of peril for anyone unfamiliar with its secrets. Between volleys, Jonah caught Millie's eye. There was a spark there, unspoken yet undeniable, a recognition that neither could deny. In the harshness of the mountains, amid violence and cold, something had begun to grow beyond survival. A connection as fierce and wild as the land itself. She moved beside him with effortless coordination, and he noticed the gentleness behind her vigilance, the moments when she let the guard down just enough for him to see a human warmth beneath the hunter's eyes. As the sun dipped low behind jagged peaks, the sheriff himself rode forward, his presence commanding, a threat that seemed larger than life. "Yield, Crow! Yield, Laroo! That cabin and its riches are mine." His voice was cold, a whip of authority that had crushed many before. Jonah stepped forward, rifle steady. "Not today," he said. His voice carried over the snow, steady and unyielding. Millie's hand brushed against his, just briefly, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity, and together they stood, defiant against the corruption of the town below. The final assault came just before nightfall, the ridge alive with movement, the snow turning red with the price of ambition. Jonah and Millie moved as one, covering each other, forcing the attackers into the traps and narrow corridors they had prepared. The mountains themselves seemed to fight for them, the wind howling, snow shifting, masking their movements, shielding them when precision was required. By the time the last of the posse had faltered and retreated into the descending darkness, the cabin stood, battered but unbroken. Inside, Jonah and Millie tended to minor wounds, patched broken boards, and kept the fire alive. Words were few, but the shared glances, the moments of steadying hands and careful touches, spoke louder than any conversation could. They had survived the worst the town could throw at them, and in doing so, had built something stronger than fear, trust, respect, and a bond that had begun to edge into something deeper. The ridge was silent again, the storm clouds lifting, revealing the jagged peaks of the Rockies glowing under the fading light. The mountains whispered around them, a reminder that survival required more than courage, it required patience, cunning, and the ability to rely on another. Jonah and Millie worked through the evening, reinforcing the cabin, setting watch patterns, and preparing for whatever might come next. Every shadow outside could hold a threat, but now, they faced the danger together. The snow, once a blanket of isolation, had become a stage for proving their resilience, their determination, and their willingness to fight for a claim not just of land but of life and freedom. In the quiet moments, by the glow of the fire, Jonah observed Millie as she cleaned her rifle. There was a precision, a care, in the way she handled the weapon, a reflection of the survival instinct that had kept her alive all these weeks. She caught his gaze and smiled faintly, the tension of constant vigilance softened for the briefest instant. Jonah felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of connection, a fragile hope that perhaps even in the harshest winter, warmth could exist. They shared a meal in silence, the snow drifting against the cabin walls like a reminder of the world outside, a world that had tried to claim what wasn't theirs. Every bite, every glance, every shared movement carried weight, history, and unspoken promises. The ridge was theirs, if only they could hold it, and both knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, storm, man, or beast, but tonight, they had survived together. The fire crackled, and for the first time, the cabin felt less like a trap and more like a home, a place of shared strength and tentative trust. Jonah leaned back against the wall, rifle across his knees, and Millie settled near the stove, eyes half closed but alert. In the midst of snow, blood, and gunpowder, a new rhythm had taken hold, two lives intertwined by necessity, respect, and the slow, undeniable pull of something neither had expected to find on Black Pine Ridge. The snow finally began to melt, revealing the rugged cliffs and pine-strewn valleys of Black Pine Ridge. Jonah Crow and Millie Laroo stood side by side at the edge of the clearing, surveying the land that had tested them, nearly claimed them, and yet had become their sanctuary. The cabin, battered but standing, was no longer just wood and nails, it was a symbol of endurance, courage, and the lives they had forged together amidst the harshness of the Rockies. The town of Lead Creek would continue to whisper about the cursed ridge, but those whispers no longer carried fear, they carried awe. The sheriff had retreated, and the claim, once coveted for its silver, belonged to those who had earned it not through greed, but through skill, bravery, and unbreakable resolve. Jonah and Millie had faced the unforgiving wilderness, human treachery, and the unforgiving weight of survival, and in doing so, discovered something neither had expected. A partnership born of trust, tempered in danger, and blossoming into a quiet, unshakable love.